Today I want to talk to you about a wonky number that people get very laser focused in on when they're looking at properties in our area. And that number is days on market. And I want to talk to you about why in our area it can be a little bit weird sometimes. And I'm going to get started now. Hey everyone, my name is Jamie Pretzi. I'm a real estate agent in Miami Beach. And today I'm going to talk to you about the number days on market. But first, before I get started, if this is your first time here, hit the subscribe button so you never miss another update. I do put out new videos every week. Also use the link in my information box and download our free guide today. I do update that all the time, so if you haven't downloaded it in a while, be sure to download it, and I'll also add you to our newsletter. Okay, let's get started. So if you're not familiar with the term days on market is a number, it's a time stamp that a listing gets, a property listing gets, as soon as the property hits the market. So whenever we list a property, we have a listing agreement that specifies the terms of the listing and all the details. And let's say you're supposed to start the listing on August 1st. Well, we have to upload it and have it listed inside of the MLS on August 1st. From that date on, that is the time that starts ticking with the listing. So that means, okay, if the property sells within 30 days or 60 days or whatever, then we change the status inside of the MLS to a different status and then a closing date. So every single property inside of our MLS will have some specific days on market. We use that data a lot to really determine a lot of the market conditions that we have here locally. We use that number a lot to advise sellers about price reductions, if they want to do a price reduction, if we've discussed price reductions. We use that number to advise buyers when they're making offers on properties. The thing is that days on market here can be a little bit longer than in some other areas. And I would say when you're looking at real estate, especially if you're moving from a different city or a different state, you really cannot just use the days on market comparison based on where you're coming from. For instance, I have a lot of clients who come from California, and properties there sell very quickly, and days on market is a highly respected number there. And if a property has been sitting on the market for some time, based on what I understand from that market in California, people start making assumptions about the property. And I've had several clients move here from California and they're like, wow, your days on market is a lot higher than what would ever be considered appropriate in my area where I moved from in California. So I guess my point is just you have to really understand that local market data and to understand what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. With that said, I will tell you, it is important. If you are a seller and you are selling a property here, I do think days on market is very important, but it also depends on the type of property that you're selling, and that's where I have to get into a lot of detail, and that's what I really wanted to talk about very specifically today. So I would say, to start with single family home properties and sort of the starter price points, you can really pinpoint sort of the days on markets for that type of inventory because those properties do tend to move fairly quickly. Now, if you're looking at price points that is more of a luxury single family home property, those types of properties tend to stay on the market a little bit longer, only because there are not a lot of buyers who can afford super luxury properties in the whole world. So there are only so many buyers who are going to be able to buy at very specific price points. So in the single family home market, you will definitely see that determination between the starting price points, the average price points, and maybe like a move up property. It's very easy to really gauge that data and see what is a good expectation for days on market and how long it takes a property to sell. Once you move into the single family home luxury market, that's where properties can definitely have a little bit more days on market just because, there are fewer buyers for those types of homes. And I would say that people here do tend to leave those properties on the market for some time until they sell. When we start to get into the condominium listings, the condominium properties, that's where we start to have some more days on market, just depending on numerous factors. So those properties, a lot of them tend to be second, third, or fourth homes, and sometimes even investment properties for some sellers. And so maybe a seller will reach out to their agent and say, look, I would like to sell the property, but let's just test the market out and let's see what happens. And so let's list it, right? And so most agents are going to take that listing and see what happens. You know, they'll market the property, do their photography, list it on the MLS, and do all of the work around that listing. Sometimes the sellers even say to us, like, look, I know the property is a little bit higher price, but I don't really have to sell it. I like to use it when I come down from time to time. I have family who will be using it soon. And you know what? I just want to put it on the market and let's see what happens. So I would say that is not a super motivated seller, but they would like to sell it. And that typically results with a little more days on market. The next type of seller that we have with the condominiums are typically sellers who have leased out their property and there's a tenant in the property. Now, you can always buy a property with a tenant in place. That is a very common thing that we do here because I actually work with a lot of people who buy properties as second homes or investment properties, and they love to have tenants in the property to just go ahead and take over, and they have like their long-term tenants that stay there and they're very happy with that. Very easy for them to have a tenant in place, and that allows a lot of, you know, expenses to be taken care of by the tenants. But these sellers will also say, hey, look, I want to list a property, I have a tenant, let's work with the tenant and see if we can do showings and not really bother them too much. But you see, this is also not a super motivated seller, but they would like to sell the property. Now we have the tenant in place, so we have to discuss that now. So if a tenant is in a property and you need to purchase the property as your primary residence, if you're buying cash, it doesn't really matter. But if you're getting financing and it's a loan based on buying the property as your primary residence, that's where it can be a little bit tricky, because if they have a lease that is 6 months longer, well, your bank is probably not going to allow you to purchase that property because it's supposed to be your primary residence, not a tenant occupied unit. That's a discussion that you have to have with your lender to find out how long a tenant can stay in the property after closing, if at all. But it's just something to keep in mind. And so those properties can sometimes sit on the market a little bit longer because they just don't appeal to every buyer who wants to buy. A lot of buyers want to move into the property immediately after closing. Some need financing and they have to take residence right after closing. And you know, there can just be a lot of nuances with tenant occupied properties. Also, unless the lease says something different, most of our leases here, you have to abide by the current lease terms unless there's a kick out clause. So you really have to just assume the lease and the length of that lease until the lease expires. And that leads me to one last thing about why properties can sit on the market a little bit longer, and that is because maybe the tenants are not being cooperative and allow showings. So not every tenant wants people coming through the property to preview the property, especially a lot of people who are working from home in these days of COVID, and a lot of people are just a little bit more leery about allowing a lot of people inside their property, and I get it. So the biggest thing to know is just that you cannot always judge a book by its cover in terms of days on the market. So there's just a lot of little details that we have to dive into if you're interested in purchasing a property here, and we can give you the expert data so that you can make a good decision on whether you need to sell the property or you need to buy a property, and the best ways to deal with days on market. If you have more questions about buying real estate in our area, I'm always here to be a resource for you, and we will see you soon.